Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about AlphaPicks, Seeking Alpha's stock picking service. And if you guys remember, I did a whole review on it late last year, and we just started this monthly series to explore how we can best actually use the service, and specifically how it performs with a few different approaches. So this is our breakdown for February 2025 of the 3 approaches that we outlined that we're going to monitor throughout the year. And I have to say, just being a month into it, I've already learned some things that I really wasn't prepared for, and we're going to talk about it. Let's go ahead and start with strategy 1. And if we recap what it was basically an approach to buy all of the strong buy companies on the list no matter what, which basically means that I'm taking their picks and buying them in equal amounts if they have a strong buy rating. And for this experiment, I basically act like I'm buying $1,000 worth of each stock equally. And if a stock's rating changes to hold or it gets removed from AlphaPicks, then I sell at that time. Now, if the stock simply goes from strong buy to buy, then I keep on holding, and any new stock that gets added that has a strong buy rating, then I add them as well, buying $1,000 worth. And again, I can't actually show you the stocks in the portfolio because that's obviously not fair to Seeking Alpha, but we can take a look at how it's performing, and I can give you some basic stats so you have an idea what's going on. So for strategy number 1, I currently have 19 holdings in the portfolio. And since the beginning of the year, I've made the 16 initial buys when I started the portfolio of the stocks that were already having a strong buy rating, and 8 buys since for stocks that have become strong buys, as well as 5 sells for stocks that basically were at a strong buy or buy rating and then moved to a hold rating. And now just remember, these are actually test portfolios that I made. I'm not actually using real money for this experiment because I'm already doing that in my main portfolio that you guys see every month. But for this, basically what we're doing is trying it out, seeing which one performs the best, and you still get an idea of kind of how the approaches work and what makes them different. Now, in terms of performance, we'll just do year to date since this is our first performance check of the year, and I'll do it monthly going forward as well. Now, currently, the strategy's returned 5.76% year to date compared to the S&P 500's 3.76. And remember, the S&P number is based on the timing of the buys and sells in each portfolio, so it's going to be slightly different in each one. And if we take a look at the distribution of returns, you can see that there's definitely a mix of both winners and losers. Now, there's more winners than losers, which is good, but still, you can see that a couple big winners really help drive the returns for the full portfolio. Okay, but one thing that I learned with this strategy is that the rating on the companies actually changes a lot more often than I thought it would. And so if you remember, with this strategy, I'm selling if the rating goes from strong buy or buy down to a hold. And what I found is that it's pretty common for a stock's rating to change on a day-to-day basis, or at least from a week-to-week basis. For example, I've had 4 sells already this year where the stock rating went from strong buy or buy down to hold. And so based on the strategy, I sold the stock. And in 2 of the 4 cases, the stock rating went back up to strong buy, and I bought it again. In the first case, it happened about 5 days later, and in the second case, it happened only 4 days later. And then for one of the other sales, it was a stock that I ended up only holding for about a day because it turned into a strong buy on one day, and then it turned back to a hold on the next day. So this got me thinking, because we're only 45 days into the new year, and yet in this particular strategy, I've already done an additional 13 transactions, which, I don't know, to me seems like a lot. So what I've decided to do is create an alternative version of this strategy where I keep holding the stocks even if it dips to a hold rating. But I didn't just want to replace the strategy completely because, we're still early in the year, so the pace of change and the pace of rating changes could slow down a little bit, and I still want to be able to compare it to what we originally said. But in addition to that one, this is the alternative version that we'll create. So strategy 1A, in this case, is going to be identical except for one particular change. If the stock's rating changes to a buy or hold, then I will keep holding it. And if the stock gets removed from AlphaPicks or gets a sell rating, then I'll sell it. And the idea here is to simply reduce the amount of churn and the amount of random transactions that we'll have to do anytime a stock just happens to go down to a hold rating for a short period of time. But it still focuses on holding the companies that were rated a strong buy to begin with. All right, so let's take a look at some stats for this portfolio. Now, for strategy 1A, I currently have 22 holdings, and since the beginning of the year, I've made the 16 initial buys when I started the portfolio, plus an additional 6 buys since, and as of right now, 0 sells. Now, in terms of performance, year-to-date, this strategy has returned 4.35% compared to the S&P 500's 3.29%. And if we take a look at the distribution of returns, you can see that it looks almost identical to the first one, where there's definitely a mix of winners and losers. All right, so next up is strategy 2, and here's what we said it would be. Now, approach number 2 is only adding the new picks that come about, not any previous ones, but we're buying them no matter what. Alpha Picks adds at least 2 picks each month, so there's more than enough stocks to add, and for this, I'll also be using the $1,000 worth of whatever the new stocks are. So if those stocks get removed from Alpha Picks or go down to a sell rating, then I'll sell, but notice if they just move to a hold rating, I'll still hold them. All right, so let's take a look at some stats for this portfolio. So for strategy 2, I currently only have 3 holdings because that's how many new ones we've had so far in 2025. Now, since the beginning of the year, I've made the 1 initial buy when I started the portfolio, and then 2 additional buys since, and as of right now, 0 sells. Now, in terms of performance, year to date, this strategy has returned a negative 4.62% compared to the S&P 500's 2.52%. And if we look at the distribution of returns, you can see that there's 1 winner, 1 slight loser, and then 1 big loser. And I think this showcases a big difference between these strategies, right? Because in this one, you only have 3 stocks, so your performance is going to be heavily influenced by how well those 3 stocks have performed in a very short period of time. Whereas with the first strategy, you have a whole basket of stocks that you're buying at once, and so the returns are kind of balanced out between a lot more companies. And in this case, you happen to have 1 company that's gone down a bunch since it was added, which is impacting your overall return. So this is one of those things where you need to understand what your process and time frame is going to be for these stocks. Because if you picked a stock and it did poorly in a month, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad stock. It just may need some time to actually reach its full potential. But that's something you're going to have to consider if you choose this approach. But I'm curious to see how this one trends over the rest of the year to see if it improves as you add more stocks and allow the existing ones more time to perform. Okay, then lastly, strategy number 3. Now, with approach 3, we're only adding ones on the list that also fit my personal criteria. The idea is that I'm going to use Alpha Picks as a research service that I will then screen with my own strategy. In general, I said that I'm not going to be too picky about this. As long as they loosely fit my criteria, then I'll add them just so that we can try this method out. And so the same with the other approaches, I'm going to be buying $1,000 worth of each stock. And then again, if the stocks get removed from Alpha Picks or get a sell rating, then I'll sell. But if they just move to a hold rating, I'll continue to hold. All right, so let's take a look at some stats for this portfolio. For strategy 3, I currently have 5 holdings, and since the beginning of the year, I've made 4 initial buys when I started the portfolio and 1 additional buy since, and as of right now, 0 sells. Now, in terms of performance, year-to-date, this strategy has returned 7.05% compared to the S&P 500's 3.34%. And if we look at the distribution of returns, you can see that, again, it's a mix, but having 2 really big winners helps with this portfolio, even though I still have 1 pretty big loser. But it really goes to show that having those big winners really helps drive the portfolio returns overall. So what are my overall thoughts for this first month? Now, if we just take a look at the performance of these strategies together, we can see that as of now, 45 days in, the strategy where I'm using Alpha Picks as an idea service, but still using my own criteria is performing the best. But let me just say this. I mean, number 1, it's still early. This performance doesn't really mean anything yet. And number 2, the strong buy portfolios are also outpacing the market, at least for now. And then lastly, 3, the new only strategy, honestly, it just takes time to see if this is going to be viable or not. Because look, it's impossible to judge any stock or any portfolio on a 45-day timeline, especially when it's only holding 3 or 4 stocks at a time. I mean, by this time next month, the performance of this portfolio could be drastically different. So this is something that we're just going to keep plugging along and watching it to see how it evolves. But there are a couple things that I've learned so far in this first month. The strong buy strategies, both strategy 1 and 1A, I think are going to be hard for some folks to actually do because not everyone's going to be able to buy 16 stocks right off the bat. So I don't really know how realistic that is, but I do think it's worth to track because it is really a different approach than the other 2. Now, in terms of the new only strategy, I think that's actually the most logical way that people will use Alpha Picks, because that way you're just focusing on new stocks that are being added. You're not worrying about previous history, but the challenge will be is that it's going to be very easy to get overly emotional and reactive if things don't go exactly the way you expect early on, because at that point, you're just trusting their research and anything new that comes about. And so if they don't immediately perform, I think people will get worried. So I'm really curious to see how that one performs underperforms over a longer period of time, because ideally it's one of those things that you just need to be patient with and don't get too up and down early on if it doesn't go the way you want. And then lastly, with my own criteria, obviously I enjoy this strategy because it's already what I'm basically doing with my regular portfolio. I'm just adding new ideas and research from AlphaPix and just integrating it into my existing process. But more importantly, because I screen with my own criteria, I'm less likely to get emotional or worried if it doesn't work out immediately. So even if a stock underperforms for a while, it doesn't really bother me because I've at least screened it initially with the things that I'm interested in from my general portfolio. The main thing, though, is that expecting immediate returns for anything related to investing is just not realistic. We have to have clear expectations of how we're going to use the service and not get too up or down if things don't happen exactly the way that we expect. Now, if you're interested in trying out AlphaPix with me, Seeking Alpha is doing a Valentine's Day special where you can get $50 off plus 60 days of Seeking Alpha Premium for free. If you want more info, you can check the link down in the description. And full transparency, I am a Seeking Alpha affiliate, so if you use my links to sign up, then I do get compensated at no additional cost to you. But just let me know if you have questions. But overall, it's been a very interesting first month, and I think each of these strategies helps to address different pain points that people have when picking stocks. So I'm curious to see how they end up performing as we continue on throughout the year. Now, if you have any additional questions about these portfolios or how we're tracking them, let me know down in the comments below. And if you missed my full review of AlphaPix, you can watch that by clicking this video right here. Hope you guys have a great day out there. Financial independence is true freedom, so keep building and stacking wins, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.